You're watching Noir Street. I'm your host, Nero Wolfe. Every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us where in the world you're watching from. Subscribe, tap the like button, and join us as we drift into mystery. Chapter 1. The first lesson in mercy. If you've lived in New York long enough, you learn that rain doesn't wash the city clean. It just makes the dirt shine. That Tuesday started with the kind of weather that gives a man an excuse for anything. Soft rain, low sky, tires hissing on wet pavement outside our windows on West 35th. Downstairs, the old brownstone behaved as it always did, stone-faced and stubborn, while inside it ran on schedules and appetites, both set by Nero Wolfe, at 9:45. Fritz Brenner had already laid out Wolfe's breakfast tray, with the care of a jeweler showing diamonds. At 10, Wolfe would settle into the red leather chair in his bedroom, napkin tucked under his chin like a man about to argue with a lobster. At 11, the orchids would claim him. At 1, the office would claim me. At 4, the city would try to claim all of us. It was 7 minutes to 10 when the doorbell rang, which was either fate or a practical joker. I moved because that's what I do. Keep the world from interrupting Wolfe too harshly. I opened the street door and got a faceful of wet air, and a man who looked like he'd been forced to sprint through it. He wasn't dressed like a runner. He was dressed like a man who wanted people to see him as competent. Brown overcoat. Hat that cost more than my first car. Shoes that had never met a puddle until now, and were taking the meeting personally. He said, "Archie Goodwin." Depends who's asking. "The mayor, I'm his cousin." He swallowed, not amused. "My name is Evan Klein. I need to see Mr. Wolfe." That's usually the line that precedes either a sob story, a check, or trouble, sometimes all three. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "But if you track mud onto the rug, Fritz will make a note and Wolfe will punish you by thinking about you." He came in anyway. Careful now. Like the floor might bite him, he handed me a damp business card from an inside pocket. Evan Klein, financial consultant. The kind of title that can mean anything from advising millionaires to babysitting disasters. "Mr. Wolfe is at breakfast," I said. "If you've got a gun, keep it holstered. If you've got a confession, keep it for later. If you've got money, keep it where I can see it." "I don't have." He stopped, shut his mouth, tried again. It's not about me. It always is." I took him into the office and set him in the red leather chair reserved for clients who either have money or are about to make a mess. He didn't relax. His eyes flicked to the bookcases, the desk, the globe, like he expected a trap to spring out of the walnut paneling. His hands were steady, though. That was something, I said. "Talk while you wait. It keeps the air lively." He hesitated. "Do you know a man named Caleb Vance?" I didn't, not personally. But the name had the kind of snap you remember once you hear it. Sounds like a fellow who sells sorrow in small weekly payments. Klein's mouth tightened. That's not far off. The door behind me opened and closed with a deliberate softness, and I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Wolfe moved like a man who resented the laws of motion but complied, because the universe insisted. He filled the doorway, too large for it, wearing his yellow pajama, like houseclothes, and looking as if the world had disturbed him personally. He took in Klein with one glance. Wolfe could do that, measure a man's weight without knowing his number. I said, "Mr. Wolfe, Evan Klein, he knows a man named Caleb Vance." Wolfe's eyes narrowed a fraction. "I have heard the name." He came to his chair behind the desk and settled in, the way a king settles into his throne, as if the chair should be grateful. "Mr. Klein, it is an inconvenience to disturb my breakfast." Klein sat straighter, like a student facing a stern headmaster. "I'm sorry, I didn't know where else to go." "You rarely do," Wolfe said mildly. "That is why I am employed." I leaned on the side of the desk, casual on purpose. "Tell him why you're dripping on Fritz's rug." Klein drew a breath. "Caleb Vance is dead." Wolfe didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He didn't even look surprised. He looked mildly annoyed, like someone
Nero
had
Wolfe
misplaced a
and the
book.
umbilical cord of
Klein went
wristwatch.
on,
A jeweler
words
shows
quick
Wolfie a
now. He was
watch
killed
that
in his
only
office
runs
on
when
Riddle
someone
Street.
touches it.
His throat was
Open the
cut.
back, there was a
No
thin thin
struggle.
wire, like
Someone placed a
the
receipt
watch
on
is
his
tied to a
chest.
person.
It
When a
said,
jeweler
it
kills,
said,
let's figure
debt
out the
paid in
story.
full. And there was
What
an
might
envelope,
it
sealed,
comment next, and I
addressed
will
to
draw
someone.
part 2.
Inside was a contract stamped void. Riddle Street? That's a real street. It's a lane off Baxter, Klein said. Small offices, cash businesses, people who don't ask questions. Wolf's voice was quiet. And you are telling me because? Klein's throat worked. Because the envelope was addressed to my sister. There it was, the hook in the cheek. Wolf's eyes fixed on him. Your sister's name. Lina Klein. Wolf's lips pressed together. He was thinking. He always was. The trick was noticing when he had shifted from merely being alive to actively assembling a solution. I said, your sister borrowed from Vance. Yes. How desperate? I asked. Klein's jaw tightened. Desperate enough that she wouldn't tell me. I found out when I was called by the police. Wolf's eyes flicked to me. That meant, Archie, this is now your business. I said, police called you because your sister's name was on an envelope sitting next to a dead man. Klein nodded. They asked if I knew where she was. I don't. She wasn't home this morning. She didn't answer my calls. I went to her apartment. The door was locked. Her neighbor says she left early, wearing a dark coat. Wolf folded his hands on the desk, fingertips touching. You are concerned that she is suspected. I'm concerned she's... Klein swallowed. I'm concerned she did it. That was honest. And it took more courage than most people have to say it out loud. It also meant he loved her. If he didn't, he would have come in yelling innocence and demanding miracles. Wolf said, your concerns do not constitute employment. Klein looked panicked. Mr. Wolf, I can pay. Wolf's eyes remained calm. Then pay. My fee is not negotiable. Klein blinked. How much? Wolf named a number that made Klein's face pale. I watched it happen and tried not to smile. Wolf wasn't cruel, he was just Wolf. He considered time valuable and humanity unreliable, so he priced his patience accordingly. Klein hesitated exactly 2 seconds. Then he nodded. Yes, I liked him better for that. The ones who balk are either broke or stupid. The ones who agree are either rich or desperate. Desperation can be useful, Wolf said. Very well. Archie will accompany you to this office on Riddle Street. He will observe. He will listen. He will return and tell me what matters. Klein's face showed relief so fast you could practically hear it. Thank you. Do not thank me, Wolf said. You have not yet paid. Klein fumbled in his coat, producing a checkbook, hands finally not steady. He wrote Tor, handed it across. I took it and glanced at the number. It was correct. I put it in Wolf's top drawer, because that's where money goes in our house, into the drawer and into Wolf's satisfaction. Wolf nodded once. Now, Mr. Klein, you will answer questions. Klein leaned forward, as if he'd been commanded by gravity. Wolf asked,
Nero
your
Wolfe
sister's
and the
age?
umbilical cord of
31.
wristwatch. A jeweler shows
Occupation.
Wolfie a watch that only
She's a
runs when
nurse.
someone touches it.
Night shift
Open the back,
sometimes.
there was a
Any
thin
recent
wire,
changes in her
like
behavior?
the watch is tied to a
Klein's mouth
person.
tightened.
When a jeweler
She's been
killed, let's
tired,
figure out the
quiet.
story.
She told me she was
What
behind on
might
rent.
it
I
comment
offered to
next,
help.
and I will draw part
She
2.
refused. Any romantic entanglements? Klein looked uncomfortable. Not that I know of. Wolf's eyelids lowered slightly. That means yes. Klein sighed. She mentioned a man, a name. Dominic Hale. I felt a prickle. Names are like keys. Sometimes you don't know the door until you have the key, Wolf said. Who is Dominic Hale? A lawyer, Klein said. Or he used to be. She said he helped her with something. I didn't press. Wolf's eyes stayed on him. When did she borrow from Caleb Vance? I don't know the date. I found a notice in her trash last week. It was from Vance's office. It said she owed $2,600 by Friday. Last Friday? I asked. Yes. And she was still alive Friday night, Klein said quickly. I spoke to her on the phone. She sounded strained but normal. Wolfe leaned back, as if he'd finished weighing the evidence, and found it insufficient. Describe Caleb Vance. Klein frowned. I met him once, short, neat, smiling. The kind of man who looks friendly until you notice he never smiles with his eyes. I said, a stapler smile. Klein looked at me, startled. Then he gave a thin, grim nod. Exactly. Wolfe's gaze drifted past him toward the window, toward the rain, streaked world beyond. When Wolfe looks away like that, he's looking inward. I've seen him do it after eating fresh shad, after receiving threats, after hearing confessions, after reading a menu. The man's brain doesn't stop, he said, softly. A receipt on the chest, a voided contract in a sealed envelope. That is not panic. He paused. That is principle. Klein swallowed. What does that mean? It means, Wolfe said, that the murderer wishes to be understood. I had heard that before. It's the kind
Nero
of thing
Wolfe
Wolfe
and
says when he
umbilical cord
suspects a mind
confused
at work
watch.
rather than a
A jeweler
frenzy. It is
shows
always
looking
worse when a
watch
murderer
that only
wants to be
runs when
understood,
someone touches it.
because then you're dealing
Under
with
the
an
back,
argument,
there was a
not an
piercing
accident.
wire, like
Wolfe looked
the
at
watch
me.
is tied to a
Archie
person.
coat.
Then a jeweler killed
I
it.
got mine.
Let's figure it out
I
fast
also got
forward.
my hat,
Hope you
because
like the
Rain
film.
and my hair
Come
don't
back
get
next
along.
and
As we
unravel
were heading
part
out,
2.
Fritz appeared in the hall, his face calm as a well-made sauce. Mr. Wolfe, your breakfast. Wolfe lifted a hand, latter. Fritz's eyebrows rose a fraction. That's as close as he comes to shock. Breakfast postponed is a major event in this house. It meant Wolfe considered this matter either urgent or personally interesting. That alone made the hair on my arms lift. Outside, the city breathed wet. Taxi horns sounded muffled. The rain didn't fall hard, it lingered, like it had nowhere else to be. Klein's car was a black sedan with a clean interior and the faint smell of money. He drove with both hands on the wheel, eyes fixed, jaw set, as if the street might accuse him. I rode shotgun, watching the city slide past, storefronts, puddles, pedestrians hunched under umbrellas like guilty thoughts. You called the police? I asked. They called me. Klein said. They found my name in Lena's phone. And you came to Wolfe instead of to her. I can't find her, Klein said. And if she did it, she'd be terrified. She'd run. She's not built for running. Most people aren't, I said. They just think they are until they try. Riddle Street, as it turned out, existed the way some lies exist. Tucked away, narrow, half-shadowed, only noticed by those who need it. A short lane off a busier street, lined with small office doors and faded signs, and a smell that was part wet concrete, part old paper, part desperation. We pulled up behind a patrol car. A couple of uniforms stood under an awning, smoking despite the rain. I flashed my credentials: private detective, assistant to Nero Wolfe, professional nuisance, and was waved through with the kind of shrug cops reserve for people who will either help or get in the way. Inside, Caleb Vance's office was too neat for the act it had hosted. That was the first thing that hit me. Not blood, because there wasn't much, not panic because it wasn't there, but neatness. The place looked staged like a display window for cruelty. A desk, 2 chairs, a file cabinet, a safe, a framed certificate on the wall that meant nothing, a cheap plant in a pot that looked like it had given up months ago. And on the floor, behind the desk, Caleb Vance lay on his back with his hands folded neatly on his stomach, as if he'd been placed there by someone who believed in manners. His throat was cut with a precision that made my own throat tighten in sympathy. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling, not accusing, not pleading, just present. On his chest sat a narrow strip of receipt paper, clean and white against his dark suit, debt paid in full. If you've seen enough corpses, you learn that the body isn't the strangest part. The strangest part is what the living leave behind to explain themselves. A detective in a rumpled suit stood near the window, reading something in a notebook. He looked up as we entered. The rain had given his hair a permanent sulk. His eyes were sharp. "Were you?" he demanded. "Archie Goodwin," I said. "Nero Wolfe's office." His mouth
Nero
twitched,
Wolfe
half
and the umbilical
irritation,
cord
half
of his
recognition.
watch. A jeweler shows
Wolf didn't
Wolfie a
come.
watch that
He
only
doesn't
runs when
travel
someone
unless
touches
the
it.
city is on fire
Open the back,
and someone
then
offers him
a jeweler
dinner,
thin
I
wire
said.
like
I'm his
the watch is
substitute.
tied to a person. Then a jeweler
The
kills.
detective
That's the
snorted.
of the
Detective
story.
Sergeant Pearlie
Hope you
Stebbins.
like it.
I knew the
Comment
name,
next and I will
and
draw
he
part
knew.
2.
I knew. Stebbins had a mind that worked even when his supervisors didn't. That made him dangerous, in a useful way. Stebbins nodded toward Klein. And you are? Evan Klein, Klein said tightly. Stebbins' eyes narrowed. Brother of Lena Klein. Klein flinched at the way Stebbins said it, as if her name had been found in a place it shouldn't be, I said. We're here because of that envelope. Stebbins looked at me for a long second, then jerked his head toward the desk. Over there. Don't touch. On the desk sat the envelope, white, sealed, addressed in neat block letters, Lena Klein under it. Vance's return address, no stamp. It hadn't been mailed. It had been placed. Beside it lay a folder, the kind Vance probably used to keep people pinned down. A contract inside, stamped in bold ink, void. The stamp was clean, straight, pressed with deliberate force. You open it, I asked. Stebbins nodded. We did standard procedure. Contracts inside, no other note, no fingerprints worth a quire. Whoever did this either wore gloves or wiped. Any sign of a fight, I asked, though the answer was obvious. Stebbins shook his head. None. No overturned furniture. No defensive wounds. Cut was quick. Knife was sharp. Cash drawer, I asked, nodding toward the desk. Still has cash, Stebbins said. Watches on him, wallets in his pocket. This wasn't robbery. No kidding, I muttered, staring at that receipt on the chest. Klein's voice came out thin. Did you find Lena? Stebbins gave him a flat look. Not yet, I asked. Who found the body? Cleaning woman, Stebbins said. Comes in at 7. Found him. Screamed we arrived. Landlord. Confirmed Vance was here last night. Office lights off by 9. Any clients last night? I asked. Stebbins' eyes narrowed. That's what we're working on. Vance kept appointments in a book. Books missing. That mattered. A missing appointment book was like a missing spine. I moved closer, not touching, just looking. The desk blotter was clean. The pen cup held 2 pens, a letter opener, a small brass scale, decorative, like a joke about justice. The wastebasket held nothing but a crumpled paper towel. I said, he didn't do much writing last night. Stebbins frowned. What makes you say that? The pens are upright, I said. People who write a lot tend to chew on something, or smear ink, or leave caps off. This looks like a
Nero
showroom.
Wolfe and the
Either he
umbilical
was tidy
cord
to the
of
point of
his
illness,
watch.
or
A jeweler
someone
shows
tidied.
Wolfie a watch that
Stebbins'
only
eyes
runs when
sharpened.
someone touches it.
He looked around
Open the
again,
back,
as
there
if
was a
seeing the room for the
pure
second
thin
time.
wire, like
Klein stared
the
at the
watch is
envelope
tied
like
to a
it might bite
person.
him.
Then a
Why would
jeweler
someone
kills.
void her
That's the
contract?
of the story.
That's the question,
Hope you like it.
Stebbins said.
Comment
Or the
next and I will
performance.
draw part
I
2.
crouched a little, careful not to cross any lines. Vance's shoes were polished. No scuff marks. The cut on his throat was clean, almost surgical. Whoever did it was close enough to do it right, and calm enough to place his hands afterward. I stood and looked at the receipt again. Debt paid in full, not paid, not settled, not forgiven paid, I said. What's the receipt from? His machine. Stebbins nodded. Receipt roll matches the one in his little printer. Meaning the murderer used his own equipment, I said. Or Vance printed it himself. Stebbins shot back. I turned my head. You think he staged his own murder? Stebbins' mouth flattened. Number, I think it's possible he knew the killer. Let them in, didn't struggle. That doesn't happen with strangers unless the stranger is holding a gun or the victim is asleep. He wasn't asleep, I said, glancing at the open eyes. Stebbins shrugged. Then he knew them, or he was surprised. Klein's voice cracked. Lena wouldn't. Stebbins cut him off. Your sister was on his desk in a sealed envelope next to a corpse. That buys her suspicion whether she deserves it or not. I didn't like the way Stebbins said it, even though it was true. Truth can be rude, I said. Can I see the stamp? Stebbins hesitated, then handed me a plastic evidence bag containing the stamp. The ink pad was separate. The stamp face read void in block letters. Standard office supply. Nothing fancy. What's it usually used for? I asked. Stebbins shrugged. Marking contracts. Vance voids them when paid. Or when he wants someone to think they're paid, I said. Stebbins' eyes stayed on me. Wolfe's going to say something clever, isn't he? He'll say something accurate, I said. Sometimes it looks clever by accident. Klein's phone buzzed. He snatched it up, looked, then sagged. It's my assistant I missed. He cut himself off, face tight. I can't think about that, I said. You don't have to. That's what you hired Wolfe for. Stebbins snorted. You hired Wolfe. Great. That means my day just got worse. It may get better, I said. Depends how fond you are of being right. Stebbins leaned closer, voice low. We've got a couple of angles. Vance had enemies, borrowers, competition. One woman came in last week screaming he ruined her life. Another guy threatened him in front of witnesses. Names? I asked. Stebbins shook his head. Not for you, not yet. I smiled. You know Wolfe.
Nero Wolfe and the
If you
umbilical
don't tell
cord
us,
of Fritz
he'll
Watch.
find out
A
anyway.
jeweler shows Wolfe
If
a
you do
watch
tell us,
that only runs
you
when
can
someone
pretend it
touches
was
it.
your idea.
Open the bag,
Stebbins
there was a
glared.
hero
Then
in
reluctantly
white,
he said,
like
Woman's name
watch
is
is
Rena
tied to a
Harrow.
person.
Works at a
Angela
diner
knew
nearby.
that figure it out
Guy's
and
name
told,
is Mark Deller.
hope you
Auto
like it.
mechanic.
Comment
Both had
next,
loans.
and I will drop part 2.
Klein stiffened. Lena never mentioned either. People don't mention embarrassment, I said. They bury it. Stebbins watched me. And what's your angle? I looked again at the corpse, the receipt, the envelope, the voided contract. The room didn't feel like a murder scene. It felt like a message. My angle, I said, is mercy. Stebbins blinked. What? Summonen wanted to do a good deed, I said, keeping my voice light. Because otherwise it sounded crazy. They killed the man who profited off misery. Then they cleared a debt. Then they announced it. That's not the usual pattern for murder. Murderers don't hand out receipts unless they're telling a story. Stebbins' face hardened. Mercy doesn't cut throats. No, I agreed, but someone thought it did. Klein's hands clenched. If Lena did it, I cut him off. If she did it with a steady hand and a steady mind. That means she either snapped cleanly, which is rare, or she planned, which is worse. Stebbins nodded once, grimly, like he'd been thinking the same thing. I said, I'm going back to Wolfe. Stebbins lifted an eyebrow. You got enough? I got the smell. I said, Wolfe can cook from there. Klein looked at me, desperate again. What do I do? You do what Wolfe likes best, I said. You wait. And you tell the truth, preferably before the police decide what the truth is. Stebbins pointed toward the door. You can go, but tell Wolfe something for me. What? Stebbins' eyes narrowed. Tell him this isn't just a payday lender. Vance had connections, money moves. And when money moves, people who think they're
Nero
untouchable
Wolfe
get
and the
nervous.
umbilical cord of Fritz
I
Watch.
nodded.
A
That
jeweler
was
shows
useful.
Wolfe a watch
It meant the
that
case
only
might
runs
grow
when
teeth.
someone touches it.
Back in the
Open
car,
the bag,
the rain
there
had
was a
eased,
hero
but the
in
sky
white,
still
like
looked like it was thinking
the
about
watch is
another
tied to a
round.
person. Then a jeweler killed
Lyon
it.
drove
That's
faster
figure
now,
the story.
impatience in his
Hope
hands.
you like it.
I stared out
Comment
at the wet
next,
city
and
and
I will
thought
drop
about a
part
word
2.
I didn't like, principle. Principle is what people use when they want to justify doing something terrible for a reason that sounds clean. Wolfe had said the murderer wanted to be understood. I believed him, and I didn't like it because the kind of person who kills to make a point usually has more points to make. When we reached the brownstone, Fritz opened the door with his usual calm, and I saw at once that Wolfe had not resumed breakfast. The tray was still there, untouched, as if time had paused in respect. Wolfe sat in the office, large and composed behind his desk, eyes half-lidded. He looked at me as we entered, and I knew he'd been waiting, not patiently but intently. Well, he said. I took off my wet hat, shook it once, careful not to splash the rug, and said, Caleb Vance is dead. All right, clean throat, clean room, no struggle, no robbery. Receipt on his chest says debt paid in full. Sealed envelope addressed to Lena Klein on the desk next to a voided contract. Appointment book missing, and Stebbins says Vance had enemies and connections. Wolfe's eyes opened fully. That was rare. It meant the facts had landed in the right places, he said, softly. Connections. Then he looked at Klein. Mr. Klein, your sister is either a criminal or a pawn. Klein's face went white. Which is it? Wolfe's voice was calm as a blade. At present I do not know, but I will know. He glanced at me. Archie, find the sister. I grimaced. Sure, in a city of 8 million, during rain, with no address other than nervous. Wolfe's mouth twitched. Not a smile, but close. Then begin with the man named Dominic Hale. I blinked, the lawyer. Yes, Wolfe said. If the murderer wishes to be understood, he has chosen his audience carefully. We must learn why Lena Klein was selected to receive mercy. He paused, and his eyes went to the untouched tray as if remembering it existed. And Archie? Yeah. Do not call it mercy in my hearing. Mercy does not leave receipts. That was Nero Wolfe for you, a man who could be disgusted by sentimentality even while chasing the logic behind it. I went for the phone. Outside, New York kept hissing under the rain, and somewhere in it, a woman named Lena Klein was either hiding from the police or being guided by the person who had just delivered the first lesson in mercy with a razor. Chapter 2, the second lesson in justice, 3 nights after Caleb Vance's throat got opened like an account ledger, the city got another sermon. It arrived, as sermons do in New York, without invitation, sirens, wet asphalt, and men in uniforms standing around with faces that said they'd rather be anywhere else, including church. I was in the office with Wolfe, trying to persuade him that breakfast was not a moral weakness, when the phone rang. I grabbed it on the second buzz because I like staying alive and Wolfe likes not listening to ringing. Goodwin, Detective Sergeant Stebbins, a voice said, already tired. Tell Wolfe it happened again. I kept my eyes on Wolfe. He didn't move, but his lids lowered a fraction. He was listening like a cat that hears a can opener 3 rooms away. Stebbins went on. Gordon Pike, contractor, found in a half-finished building on the west side. Same cut, same neatness, same kind of show message on the body, wages restored. And money
Nero
orders,
Wolfe
lots
and
of
the
them.
umbilical cord of
Made
his
out to
watch.
workers, he
A
shorted.
jeweler
I
shows
glanced at
Wolfe a
Wolfe.
watch that
He
only
stared
runs
at me
when
as if the
someone touches
phone
it.
were a nuisance.
Open the
But the
bag, there
information were
was a
food,
key or two
Stebbins
wire,
added.
like
There's a
the
wrinkle.
watch is tied to a
Wolfe will
person.
like it.
Then a jeweler killed
What kind of
to carry
wrinkle?
out the
I
story.
asked. A money order
Like
made
the
out to a worker who
comment
quit months
next, and
ago.
I will draw
Pike
part to the
didn't owe him
worker.
anything anymore. We checked. That's why I'm calling. Wolfe spoke without looking up. Tell him I will come. I blinked. Wolfe coming to a crime scene is like Fritz serving burnt sauce possible, but it makes you check for earthquakes. I covered the mouthpiece and said, You sure? You've got orchids at 11. My orchids, Wolfe said, will survive my absence. I am less confident about your competence without me. That was Wolfe's version of affection. I went back to the phone. He'll come. Try to look pleased. Stebbins snorted and hung up. 10 minutes later, Wolfe was in his best dark suit, hat on, expression sour enough to curdle milk. And I was thinking, not for the first time, that the city managed to get him out of the brownstone only for 3 reasons: food insult, or a case that dared him. The building where Gordon Pike was found sat like a broken tooth against a grey sky, concrete skeleton, scaffolding, tarps snapping softly in the rain. The place smelled of wet lumber and ambition that had missed a few payments. Inside, the scene was so tidy it looked rehearsed. Pike lay on plywood laid over beams, his hands folded neatly, his throat cut with the same clean precision as Vance's. There was no spatter on the walls, no overturned tools, no panic in the air, just damp and quiet, and the kind of stillness that makes you lower your voice without knowing why. On his chest, a strip of paper read, Wages restored. Near one of the upright beams, taped flat as if for inspection, was a stack of money orders. Each was made out to a name, each in an amount that looked calculated, not guessed. Everyone signed in the same careful hand. Stebbins was there, of course, looking as if he'd slept in his suit. With him
Nero
was a
Wolfe
woman I
and the
hadn't met
umbilical
before,
cord of
mid-30s,
wristwatch. A
short
jeweler
dark
shows
hair under a
Wolfe a
rain,
watch that only
spotted
runs
hat,
when someone
posture
touches it.
straight, eyes
But
sharp
under
enough to
that,
cut
there
wire.
was a
She
here
had the
thin
kind of
wire,
calm that
like
comes from being
the watch
competent
is
in
tied
rooms
to a
full
person.
of men who
The jeweler
underestimate
guilt
you.
that
Stebbins
she laid
said,
out the story.
Goodwin,
Wolfe
Wolfe.
liked it.
Wolfe gave a grunt
Like
that could
next,
mean hello
never go
contempt,
far too.
or both. The woman stepped forward. Nero Wolfe? Wolfe's eyes took her in with quick, precise dismissal of the irrelevant and instant cataloguing of the useful. Yes, I'm Rena Hale, she said. Assistant District Attorney. I'm here because Pike had city contracts and friends who will start making calls the minute they smell trouble. The name hit my ear and bounced around my brain. Hale Wolfe's gaze didn't flicker. You are related to Dominic Hale. Rena Hale's mouth tightened. Not guilt. Annoyance. He's my brother. That added a new hinge to the door we'd already been pushing on. Wolfe nodded once. I will speak with him. Renee's eyes sharpened. If you plan to drag him into this, I plan, Wolfe said, to understand. Whether your brother is convenient is secondary. Stebbins cleared his throat, a sound that translated to, please don't start a war in my crime scene. I moved closer to the money orders without touching them, reading names as best I could. Some were for $50, some for $200, one for $600. The amounts weren't random. They looked like someone had done math with patience. Rena Hale said, this is charity with a knife. Wolfe was studying Pike's hands. Number it is justice with vanity. Stebbins pointed at the stack. We've identified most of the names as laborers on Pike's projects. Complaints filed, wage disputes, that sort of thing Pike was known for. Misplacing payroll money, I supplied. Stebbins shot me a look. Yes, that. Wolfe walked a slow circle. More accurately, he took a few careful steps, because Wolfe doesn't walk the perimeter so much as he tolerates it. He looked at the tape holding the money orders, looked at the beam, looked at the plywood under Pike. Then he stopped and stared at one money order longer than the others. That one, he said. Stebbins frowned. The one made out to Leo Maris. That's the ghost. Quit months ago. We tracked him down. Pike didn't owe him anything. Maris even said Pike overpaid him once to keep him quiet about something. Renee Hill lifted a shoulder. Maybe the killer didn't know. Wolfe's head turned slowly toward her, as if she'd suggested the earth was flat. The killer knows. That is the signature of the entire performance, I said. Then why pay a ghost? Wolfe didn't answer me. He answered the room the way he does when he's lecturing reality into behaving. Because, he said, this is not mere repayment. It is display. The message is not for Gordon Pike. He is dead. The message is for observers, for victims, for the city, for law. Rena Hale's eyes narrowed. So, it's a crusade. Wolfe looked at the rain, dark skeleton of the building, and then at Pike again, as if comparing structures. A crusade is noisy. This is careful. He pointed his thick finger at the ghost money order. That error is not ignorance. It is intention. Stebbins frowned. Intention to what? Make a mistake. Wolfe's voice went colder. To look right. The words hung in the damp air. I felt it then, the same thing I'd felt at Vance's office. Not fear, exactly. More like the city itself was being instructed, corrected, punished. Rena Hale said,
Nero
you think the
Wolfe and
killer
the
wanted
umbilical
someone to
cord
notice
of
that money
wristwatch.
order? Yes,
A jeweler
Wolfe
shows
said.
Wolfe a watch
It is a
that only
flag.
runs when
A
someone
flag
touches
for
it.
who?
Open the back,
Stebbins
there was
demanded.
a here thin
Wolfe's
wire,
eyes
like
moved to Rena
the
Hale,
watch is
for
tied to a
someone
person.
connected to Leo
The jeweler
Maris.
guilt that she
Rena's
laid
jaw
out the
tightened.
story.
He's just a
Wolfe
laborer.
liked
Wolfe's
it.
tone stayed
Comment
polite,
next,
which
never
from
go
him can
far
be
too.
worse than anger. No one is just anything when they become a deliberate detail in a murder. Stebbins rubbed a hand over his face. We've got the same problem as last time. No prints, no weapon, no witnesses who saw anything useful. The watch is still on him. His wallet's still in his pocket. The scene is clean as a showroom, Wolfe said. Then we must stop admiring the showroom and ask who paid for the lighting. That means paperwork. It means politics, she corrected, and pressure. Wolfe looked at her, and for a second I saw what he saw, a capable woman who was used to being the adult in the room, and who had just realized the room was full of adults who might not be on her side. Wolfe said, "Miss Hale, your brother has recently been mentioned to me in connection with another matter." Her eyes didn't flinch, but her voice tightened. "Dominic is not violent." "I did not say he was," Wolfe replied. "I said he is relevant." Stebbins broke in. "We'll be bringing in Pike's foreman, his accountant, and a couple of workers who had beef with him. If you want access." "I want information," Wolfe said. "Access is your problem." I drove, because Wolfe thinks driving is a vulgarity, and I think taxis are a gamble. After a full block of silence, he said, "Archie." "Yeah?" "The money order to Leo Maris is a message to the killer's true audience." "Which is?" I asked. Wolfe's eyes remained on the window. "Someone who knows that name and will understand that the killer is not merely paying debts. He is correcting a history." I swallowed. "So we're not hunting a thief with a knife, we're hunting a judge." Wolfe turned his head slightly, enough to look at me. "A judge," he said, "who has appointed himself. And that, in New York, is the kind of man who does not stop after 2 lessons. Chapter 3, the pattern that smelled like soap. The city did not panic. That was the first thing Wolfe noticed, and the first thing he disliked. 2 men had been found with their throats cut as neatly as ribbon, each posed like a cautionary tale, each accompanied by paperwork more meticulous than a tax audit. Ordinarily, New York responds to that sort of thing with headlines in tall type and fear in short supply. Instead, there were murmurs. In diners on stoops, in the low corners of office elevators, people said things like, "Well, Vance had it coming, and Pike stiffed half his crew." The gratitude was never loud. It was discreet, like tipping extra for good service. Wolfe despised it. Public morality, he told me on Thursday morning, is a sentimental parasite. It feeds on spectacle. We were in the office. He was in his chair, vast and yellow, vested, having resumed his sacred routines after his field excursion. The orchids had been appeased. Fritz had been forgiven for nothing in particular. The city had been studied from a distance. Across from him sat Rena Hale. She had arrived precisely at 10, declined coffee with a nod, and positioned herself in the red leather chair as if it were a witness stand she intended to dominate. Her hat rested on her lap. Her eyes were alert, controlled. 2 men, she said evenly, both with records of complaints, both difficult to prosecute, now both dead. "And you are troubled," Wolfe said, "that the city is not weeping." Werena's mouth tightened. "I'm troubled that some of my colleagues aren't weeping." I leaned against the desk. "When bad men die, grief gets expensive." Wolfe shot me a glance. "Not rebuke, a reminder," Rena said. "You think this stops at 2? "No," Wolfe said calmly. He folded his hands, fingertips touching, and regarded her as if she were a question worth answering properly. 2 victims, he continued. Both financial predators. 2 scenes arranged with deliberate symmetry, each accompanied by documentation correcting an injustice, each with an unnecessary flourish. Rena nodded slightly. The voided contract. "The ghost payment," I added. Wolfe inclined his head. "Yes, in both instances, the killer risked additional exposure to ensure completeness. The contract for Miss Lena Kylene was stamped void and sealed for delivery. The money orders were calculated with precision, and one was issued to a man no longer owed anything," Renina said. Sloppy. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward her. "Number excessive." He leaned back. "A careless murderer minimizes contact. This one multiplies it. He handles documents, calculates sums, prints receipts, arranges bodies. He lingers." I said. "He lingers because he wants it perfect." Wolfe gave a small nod. "Precisely." Renela looked from him to me. "You're assuming it's a man." Wolfe shrugged a massive shoulder. Statistically probable, but not essential to the analysis. René's eyes narrowed. You've already given him a personality. I have given the behavior a name, Wolfe corrected. And that name is, she asked. Wolfe's lips curved faintly. The moral perfectionist. The room absorbed it, I said. You make him sound like a hygiene product. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. Indeed. He gestured faintly with one hand. These crimes smell of soap. Rina blinked. Soap, cleansing, Wolfe said. Not rage, not greed. Cleansing. He turned to me. Archie, how many times have you seen a murderer go to unnecessary trouble to tidy a scene? Usually when they think neatness equals innocence, I said. And here, Wolfe continued, neatness equals righteousness. Irina shifted slightly. You're saying he's writing something? Yes, Wolfe said. An essay. I watched her absorb that. She was not a woman easily rattled, but the idea of murder as literature unsettles even the competent. Wolfe went on. Each act is structured. Title on the body, documentation to prove the thesis. Correction of financial injustice. The crimes are not merely killings, they are arguments. René's voice lowered. Arguments against whom? Against disorder, Wolfe said. Against exploitation, against the failure of the system. And against you, I said gently. She didn't flinch this time. You think this is a message to the courts? I think, Wolfe said. It is a message to anyone who believes themselves entitled to profit from vulnerability. He leaned forward slightly. And I think the killer desires acknowledgement. Rina's eyes sharpened. From you. Wolfe's lids lowered halfway. From someone capable of understanding. There it was again. That faint current beneath the surface. The murderer wanted to be read correctly, that made him dangerous in a way knives alone never manage. Rina crossed one leg over the other. Let's say you're right. What does he want? A perfect score, Wolfe said. She frowned. Wolfe elaborated. He is correcting accounts. Vance's debt to Lena Klein, Pike's debt to his laborers. He does not simply kill, he balances, he seeks to close the ledger. And the ghost payment? I asked. Wolfe's eyes brightened slightly. A demonstration. Of what? That he knows more than the official record, that he sees the invisible. Irina's fingers tightened slightly on her hat, brim. Leo Maris said Pike once overpaid him to keep him quiet. Yes, Wolfe said. That interests me greatly. Why? She asked. Because overpayment, Wolfe replied, implies concealment, and concealment implies leverage, I said. So the killer is telling us he knows about that leverage. Precisely. Rina leaned back, or he's bluffing. Wolfe gave her a long look. A bluffer does not leave a ghost payment. He leaves ambiguity. This is not ambiguous. It is pointed. Silence settled briefly. From the kitchen drifted the faint scent of something Fritz was constructing with butter and authority. Outside, a taxi horn protested existence. Inside, the air felt sharper. Rina said, You've spoken to Lena Klein. I shook my head. Not yet. She's still missing. And Dominic? She asked. Not yet, I said. But we plan to. Her jaw set almost imperceptibly. Wolfe noticed. He notices everything. You are protective of your brother, he observed. He's made mistakes, she said evenly. That doesn't make him a murderer. I have not accused him, Wolfe said. But he exists in the overlap between the victims. Rena's eyes flicked to me. Overlap, I said. Vance handled Lena's loan. Dominic Hale apparently helped Lena. With something Pike overpaid Leo Maris to keep quiet. Maybe Dominic represented someone connected to Pike. Maybe he knows about those payments. Irena's expression did not change, but something behind it tightened. Dominic does some private consulting, contract disputes, debt restructuring. Wolfe nodded slowly. Debt restructuring, a civilized phrase. Rina held his gaze. You're circling him. I am circling the pattern, Wolfe corrected. He steepled his fingers again. The moral perfectionist selects targets who exploit financial vulnerability. He corrects their misconduct publicly. He ensures completeness beyond necessity, and he chooses details that only someone with access to records or confessions would know. Rena said quietly, "You think the killer has inside information?" "Yes." "From where?" she demanded. Wolfe's eyes were steady. "From someone who listens to grievances." I felt the pieces shift slightly in my head. "A lawyer or a social worker," Wolfe said, "or a union representative, or a sibling." Rena inhaled slowly. "You're building a profile." "I am building a standard," Wolfe said. "Perfectionists are slaves to consistency." He turned to me. "Archie, what do we know of Gordon Pike's financial history beyond wage complaints?" "City contracts," I said. "Delayed projects, rumors of cost overruns." "Advance?" Wolfe asked. "Payday loans, high interest, aggressive
Nero Wolfe
collections."
and the umbilical
Wolfe
cord of
nodded.
wristwatch.
"Both men
The jeweler
profited from
shows
asymmetry
Sophia a
of
watch
power,"
that only runs when
Rowena
someone
said.
touches it.
"Half the city
Open the
does."
back, there was
"Yes,"
a
Wolfe
hair
agreed.
thin wire,
"Which
like
suggests
the
this will
watch
not end
tied
at
to a
2.
person.
The
The
words
jeweler
sat
blinked.
heavy. He
Let's
said,
figure it out
"The city
story.
isn't panicking."
Hope you like it.
"No,"
Comment
Wolfe
next,
said.
and I will
"It
talk
is
about it.
evaluating." Rena's eyes narrowed. "Evaluating what? Whether the killer is correct," Wolfe replied. That hit, because it was true. In some corners, the deaths of Vance and Pike were being tallied not as tragedies, but as adjustments. Rena said, very quietly, "If this continues, it will escalate." "Yes," Wolfe said, "because perfection is addictive." He leaned back, massive and composed. "Our killer is not merely eliminating predators. He is refining a philosophy," I said, "and he wants a perfect score." Wolfe's gaze met mine. "Yes." Rena rose from her chair in a smooth motion. "If there's another body." "There will be," Wolfe said gently. She paused. "And when there is," he continued, "the pattern will either confirm itself or betray itself." Rena's jaw tightened. "You sound almost eager." Wolfe's expression cooled. "I am not eager for death, Miss Hale. I am eager for error." She studied him for a long second, then nodded once. "If you find one." "I will," Wolfe said. After she left, I closed the door and leaned against it. "You really think he'll slip?" I asked. Wolfe looked at me over folded hands. "All perfectionists do." "How?" "They cannot tolerate imperfection," Wolfe said, "not even the kind that keeps them safe." I thought about the voided contract, the ghost payment, the careful handwriting, the tidy throats. "Summoners grading the city," I said. Wolfe inclined his head. "Yes, and they're desperate for a perfect score." Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, as if savoring the inevitability. "Yes, Archie," he said softly. "And the trouble with a perfect score is that it leaves no room for mercy." Chapter 4. A third lesson. This time in purity the third sermon arrived with applause. That was the detail that offended me most. Miles Kerr had been on stage at a small theater off 9th Avenue, delivering redemption in measured cadences to an audience that preferred its morality rehearsed. He was a recovery celebrity, books, podcasts, testimonials, a man who had fallen and risen and monetized the climb. When he did not return for the second half of his talk, the audience assumed dramatic timing. When he did not return at all, someone went backstage. The applause had not yet faded in the room when the first scream came. Stebbins called before the headlines could. "Goodwin," he said without preamble. "Tell Wolfe he's got his pattern." Wolfe did not object to leaving the brownstone this time. That in itself was a statement. The theater smelled of dust and velvet, with a faint undercurrent of cologne and damp wool. Backstage was narrower than it should have been, with ropes, sandbags, and forgotten props leaning in tired solidarity. Miles Kerr lay on the scuffed wooden floor between two lighting trunks. The cut was clean, the body was composed. Between his folded hands, placed with almost tender symmetry, was a small white card. "Truth is clean." Rena Hale stood near the doorway, jaw set, eyes unreadable. Stebbins hovered beside a uniform, muttering instructions. I moved in slowly, careful of lines and evidence markers. Kerr's face was slack but not contorted. No sign of struggle. No overturned chairs. No splintered crates. Whoever had approached him had done so without triggering alarm. Wolfe stood in the center of the cramped space, looking monumental among ropes and plywood. He studied the body, then the card, then the corners of the room. "Speaker," he murmured. "Preacher," Rena said quietly. "He sold sobriety and purchased hypocrisy." Wolfe replied. Stebbins jerked his head toward a brown paper bag sitting on a prop table. "You'll want to see that." Wolfe did not like bending, but he did it with dignity. Stebbins opened the bag with gloved hands and displayed the contents without touching them. 2 smaller bundles lay inside. Each bundle contained the same items: a plastic vial of prescription pills with the label peeled, a cheap burner phone, and a thick fold of cash, secured with a rubber band. One bundle was marked in block letters, police the other. Rena exhaled through her nose. "He packaged it." "Yes," Wolfe said softly. Stebbins grunted. "We've already confirmed the pills, match stuff found in Kerr's dressing room locker. Phones got messages arranging private sales, cash matches deposits, that don't show up on his official books." I said. He was keeping his story dramatic. Rena's mouth tightened, and profitable. Wolfe remained still for a long moment, then he said, "The audience did not see the blade. They saw the symbol." Rena looked at him. "Symbol?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "a man preaching purity while trafficking impurity." He turned slightly toward the paper bag, and our moral perfectionist could not resist ensuring the narrative was complete. Stebbins folded his arms. "You're telling me this is still your soap-scented crusader?" "Yes, 3 different sectors," Stebbins said. "Lender, contractor, speaker. 3 forms of exploitation," Wolfe corrected. "Financial desperation, wage theft, moral fraud." Rena crossed her arms. "That's a broad definition." Wolfe's eyes flicked to her. Broad enough to be righteous, narrow enough to be selective. I crouched slightly to examine the card without crossing into Stebbins' territory. The handwriting matched the previous messages, careful, deliberate, without tremor. "Truth is clean," I said. "He's obsessed with hygiene." Wolfe nodded once. "Purity." Rena stepped closer to the prop table, studying the 2 labeled bundles. "Why make a set for the press?" Wolfe's jaw tightened. "Because," he said, "the killer does not merely want exposure, he wants endorsement." Stebbins frowned. "Endorsement?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "He anticipates the possibility that official channels might suppress or delay the evidence. Therefore, he duplicates it." Rena's eyes sharpened. "Insurance?" "Not merely," Wolfe replied. "He wants the world to agree with him." The rain had begun again outside, tapping faintly against the backstage window, like an impatient critic, Rena said. "So he doesn't trust the police?" Wolfe gave her a long look. "He does not trust institutions to render a verdict consistent with his own." Stebbins scowled. "We would have found the pills." "I do not doubt your competence," Wolfe said mildly. "I doubt his faith." Silence held for a moment. I looked around the cramped space. No signs of forced entry. No broken latch. No blood spray beyond the immediate. The same surgical neatness. "How did he get close?" I asked. Stebbins shrugged. Kerr was used to people backstage, volunteers, fan staff. Rena said quietly, "Or someone he trusted." Wolfe nodded faintly. "Yes." He looked at the card again. "Truth is clean. Self-righteous," I muttered. "No," Wolfe said, "systematic." He straightened, which in that cramped room meant the ropes brushed his shoulder. "In each case, the killer provides documentation correcting an injustice and labeling the correction." "Debt paid in full," I said. "Wages restored," Rena added. "Truth is clean," Wolfe finished. Stebbins scratched his jaw. "They're escalating." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "In what way?" Stebbins gestured vaguely. This one's public. Theatre audience outside. That's bolder. Yes, Wolfe said quietly. Because the thesis is maturing. Rina frowned. Thesis. The first act corrected a private exploitation. The second, a commercial one. This one corrects moral deception in a public forum. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with Rain. He's refining his target, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied, and broadening his audience. Rina stared at the press bundle. He's inviting commentary. Exactly, Wolfe said. He walked, slowly, carefully, toward the exit, then stopped and looked back at the body. They cannot stand an uneven verdict, he said softly. Rina studied him. Wolfe did not answer directly. When an individual, he said, believes themselves responsible for restoring balance, dissent becomes intolerable. Stebbins grunted. You're saying he won't stop until everybody agrees these guys deserved it. I am saying, Wolfe replied, that disagreement would represent imperfection. Outside, the muffled murmur of the audience drifted faintly through the walls. Confusion rumor, already shaping narrative. Rina's voice was low. You think he wants the press to praise him? I think, Wolfe said, he wants them to confirm his reasoning. I said. What happens if they don't? Wolfe's eyes met mine. Then, he said quietly, he will correct them. That landed heavier than the body on the floor. Stebbins muttered. You're making him sound like a professor. No, Wolfe said, like a student who cannot tolerate losing points. Renee inhaled slowly. We need to get ahead of this. Yes, Wolfe agreed. She looked at him sharply. You have something. He regarded her with maddening calm. I have a narrowing, he said. Narrowing to what? She demanded. Wolfe's gaze shifted briefly toward the two labeled bundles. Summoning, he said, with access to private grievances across different professions. Lawyer, I said. Or counselor, Rina countered. Or advocate, Wolfe added. He moved toward the door. Rina followed. You're thinking about Dominic again. Wolfe paused. I am thinking, he said evenly, about individuals who hear confessions and promises and complaints, and who are trusted by those who feel wronged. Rina's jaw set. My brother represents clients. He doesn't execute them. I have not accused him, Wolfe repeated, but he inhabits a crossroads, Stebbins said. We'll bring him in if we have to. Rina shot him a look sharp enough to draw blood. You'll do no such thing without cause. Wolfe intervened, voice calm but firm. Gentlemen, Miss Hale, anger will not solve this. He adjusted his hat slightly. The killer does not merely seek justice, Wolfe said. He seeks unanimity. Rina's voice dropped. And if the city doesn't give it to him? Wolfe's eyes were very steady. Then, he said, he will teach another lesson. Chapter 5. Wolfe visits the House of Right. If you want to find a man who believes he is improving the world, you do not begin in an alley. You begin in a meeting. Wolfe announced this on Friday afternoon, shortly after declining a second helping of trout, with an expression that suggested civilization was slipping. He had been reading 3 newspapers simultaneously, a feat that always unsettled me because it meant he was searching for tone, not facts. The editorials, he said, folding one with careful displeasure, are beginning to warm. To what? I asked. To correction, he replied. The headlines regarding Miles Kerr had shifted from shock to revelation in less than 12 hours. The press bundle had done its work. Burner phone. Cash. The word hypocrisy was now being used freely and with relish. Public opinion was not horrified. It was engaged. The House of Right, Wolfe murmured. I blinked. That's a building I haven't been to. It is not a building, Wolfe said. It is a habitat. An hour later, I found myself accompanying Nero Wolfe to a neighborhood forum in a modest civic center, not far from Riddle Street. The room smelled faintly of coffee, damp coats, and determination. Folding chairs faced a makeshift dais where a banner read, Community Safety and Fairness Initiative. The phrase, cleaning up Riddle Street, was used 3 times before the first 10 minutes had passed. It was spoken the way one discusses mildew, an inconvenience that can be scrubbed away with enough resolve. Wolfe sat in the back row, occupying 2 chairs with unapologetic geometry. He wore a dark suit and an expression of profound neutrality. No one paid him much attention. Civic virtue has a way of overlooking quiet bulk. I leaned against the wall, listening. At the front, various citizens took turns at the microphone. A diner owner complaining about predatory businesses, a teacher lamenting moral decay, a landlord insisting that standards must be restored. The words fairness and accountability drifted through the room like incense, and at the center, not at the podium, not dominating the floor, was Evan Cross. He was not the loudest voice. He was not the angriest. He did not wave his arms or pound the table. He simply spoke when others finished, offering summaries so balanced they sounded like conclusions. "Let's remember," he said in a tone that carried without strain. "We're not here to vilify individuals. We're here to restore trust." Restore. The word settled neatly into the room. Cross was in his late 30s, perhaps early 40s, medium height, unremarkable build, hair neatly parted. Suit conservative without being cheap. His face was composed in the way of a man who has practiced composure. He spoke about fairness like it was oxygen. Necessary, invisible, unquestionable consequences, he said mildly at one point, are not punishments. They are nutrients. They allow a community to grow straight. Vitamins. I glanced at Wolfe. He was watching Cross the way he watches a chessboard mid-game. Not moving, not blinking, absorbing. Cross did not lead the meeting. That was the curious thing. He deferred. He invited others to speak. He thanked people with small nods. He never raised his voice. Yet, when the room grew heated, he would say, "Let's stay measured." And the temperature dropped. People leaned toward him without noticing. When someone mentioned the recent murders, carefully, cautiously, Cross did not celebrate. He did not condemn. "We must never endorse violence," he said calmly, "but we can acknowledge that systemic failures create volatility." Volatility, he spoke like a man who had sanded his thoughts until no splinter remained. Wolfe shifted slightly in his chair. That was all. After the meeting ended, the citizens lingered in small clusters, congratulating one another on reasonableness. Cross stood near the coffee table, shaking hands. He did it with careful warmth, not exuberant, not stiff. A steady clasp, direct eye contact, a small incline of the head, the warmth of a man who does not sweat in public. I watched Wolfe, watch him. Cross laughed lightly at something a woman said, then accepted a paper cup of coffee from a volunteer. He reached into his pocket and handed over a bill. The volunteer, a teenage clerk from a nearby store, fumbled with change and returned a small stack of bills and coins. Cross glanced down, paused, and then said gently, "I believe you've given me too much." The clerk blinked. "Oh, sorry." Cross separated 2 extra bills and placed them back on the table with solemn care. "There's no harm done," he said kindly, "but accuracy matters." "Accuracy matters." He said it, as if he were returning stolen art. Wolfe's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. Cross accepted the corrected change with a nod that felt ceremonial. No one applauded. No one needed to. The moment had the quiet satisfaction of a moral demonstration. Wolfe rose. It was not a sudden movement, but in a room of folding chairs it felt seismic. A few heads turned. He approached Cross without hurry, without smile. "Mr. Cross," Wolfe said. Cross turned, his expression attentive but unassuming. "Yes, my name is Nero Wolfe." Recognition flickered, not alarm, not surprise, recognition. "I've read about you," Cross said pleasantly. "I do not recommend it," Wolfe replied. Cross's mouth curved faintly. "You spoke eloquently," Wolfe continued, "about fairness." "It's not eloquence," Cross said. "It's necessity." Wolfe regarded him. "Do you believe," Wolfe asked, "that communities can be purified?" Cross's gaze did not waver. "I believe communities can improve." "Through consequence," Wolfe pressed. Through accountability, Cross said gently. Wolfe's eyes remained steady. And when accountability fails? He asked. Cross tilted his head slightly, considering. Then institutions must be reformed. Not individuals, Wolfe inquired. Cross's expression did not change. Individuals are responsible for their actions. Institutions shape incentives. Wolfe nodded once. I see. There was no accusation in his tone, no warmth either. Cross extended his hand. It was good to meet you, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe did not take it immediately. He looked at the hand, then at Cross's face. Then he shook it. The clasp was firm, controlled. As we turned to leave, I murmured, "You think that's him?" Wolfe did not answer, until we were outside. Rain misting faintly in the streetlights. I think, he said, that Mr. Cross understands the intoxicating clarity of being right. That's not illegal, I said.
Nero
No,
Wolfe
Wolfe
and the
agreed,
umbilical cord of
but it
wristwatch.
is
A
fertile.
jeweler shows Wolfe a watch that only
We
runs
walked
when
in
someone
silence
kisses
for a
it.
moment. You noticed the
Open the bag,
change,
there
I
was a
said.
hair thin wire,
Yes,
like
he gave back
the
2
watch
extra
is tied to a
bills.
person.
With
Then
gravity,
guilt
Wolfe
just
said.
figure it out
Lots of people
afterward.
return extra
Like
change.
it.
Yes,
Moment next,
Wolfe said
where we
again.
drop part
He could
two.
have corrected it casually, Wolfe replied. Instead, he sanctified it. I stopped under a street lamp. You think that was for you? Wolfe's gaze remained forward. And that makes him a killer? No, Wolfe said calmly. It makes him susceptible. The rain thickened slightly, tapping against parked cars like polite insistence. You think he's the moral perfectionist, I said. Wolfe stopped walking. He looked at me with patient intensity. I think, he said, that he lives in the house of right. And that's the killer's nesting place. Yes, he resumed walking. Perfectionists, Wolfe continued, cannot abide uneven verdicts. They cannot endure the idea that the undeserving prosper or the hypocritical thrive. Lots of people feel that way, I said. Indeed, Wolfe replied. Most of them complain. And this one? I asked. Wolfe's voice was quiet. This one, he said, educates. We reached the car. I looked back at the civic center, lights still glowing, citizens still congratulating one another on reasonableness. You're not certain, I said. No, Wolfe agreed. And if he's not the killer, then he is adjacent to him, Wolfe said. Because righteousness attracts righteousness. I slid behind the wheel. Next lesson, I asked. Wolfe's eyes were distant. The next lesson, he said softly, will test whether Mr. Cross merely believes in fairness or requires it. Chapter 6, The Unnecessary Fairness. Wolfe dug into the murders the way a locksmith works on a stubborn door. Quietly, methodically, without theatrics, and without mercy for the lock. The brownstone became a workshop. The orchids received their due, the meals arrived on schedule, and between those sacred intervals Wolfe read, dictated, and listened. I made calls. I visited offices. I listened to men explain why they had merely been aggressive, never predatory. I listened to women describe humiliation in polite tones, as if embarrassment were a tax. By Monday afternoon, the office wall bore a caseboard that would have impressed a general names, dates, arrows in Wolfe's heavy black ink. Victims arranged in a column that felt less like a list and more like a curriculum. Caleb Vance, lender, Gordon Pike, contractor, Miles Kerr, redemption merchant, under each name, a ledger. That was Wolfe's word for it. Every exploiter, he said, seated at his desk while Rena Hale stood near the board, keeps a ledger whether he admits it or not. It may not be written in ink, it may be written in memory, but it exists. Rena tapped the board lightly, and our killer reads those ledgers. I added another card beneath Vance's name. Borrowers, high interest, threats of legal action, public humiliation. Under Pike, wage complaints, delayed payroll, cash settlements with non-disclosure agreements. Under Kerr, former clients, relapses concealed for publicity, quiet payouts to silence rumors. Wolfe studied the web of grievances with narrowed eyes. They share no profession, Rena said. No neighborhood beyond coincidence. No known association. They share asymmetry, Wolfe replied. She frowned. Each, Wolfe continued, operated from a position of moral or financial advantage. Each exploited vulnerability.
Nero
I
Wolfe
leaned
and the
back
Milk
against the
of God of
bookcase. That's
Wristwatch.
half the
A
city.
jeweler shows
Yes,
Wolfie a watch
Wolfe
that only
agreed
runs
calmly,
when someone
which is why
physically
selection matters.
opens the bag and
Warina's gaze
says,
sharpened.
"Here, thin one."
Selection how? Wolfe reached
The
for a
watch is
folder
tied to a
and
person,
withdrew copies
a
of the
jeweler's
materials
image
we had
that's
assembled,
clearly off the floor.
photographs of the scenes,
Hope you like these.
transcripts of
Comment
statements,
next and watch
financial
for part
summaries.
2.
He laid 3 photographs side by side on his desk. Observe, he said, the voided contract addressed to Lena Kine, the ghost money order to Leo Maris, the press packet labeled press. In each case, Wolfe said, the killer corrected an injustice. Rena nodded slowly. But in each case, Wolfe continued, tapping the photographs, there is one correction that is unnecessary. I said, unnecessary how? Unnecessary to the murder. Wolfe clarified. Unnecessary to concealment, unnecessary to symbolic clarity. He indicated the first photograph. Lena Kline's debt had not yet been legally escalated. It was oppressive but not irreversible. The killer voided it and sealed it for delivery. Message, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. But also insurance. The debt was to be erased beyond question. He tapped the second photograph. Leo Maris was no longer owed wages. Pike had overpaid him previously, yet the killer issued a money order in his name. Rina said. That was the mistake. Wolfe shook his head. Number, that was the confession. She stared at him. The killer knows, Wolfe said, that someone might say he overlooked a grievance, so he ensures none remain. He tapped the third photograph, and here, with Miles Kerr, he duplicates the evidence for the press. The police would inevitably uncover the pills and the phone, yet he prepares a second packet. To guarantee exposure, I said. To guarantee agreement, Wolfe corrected. Rena leaned back against the edge of the desk. So the killer can't stop themselves from being thorough. Wolfe shook his head slowly. Worse, he said. They cannot tolerate the thought that someone, somewhere, could accuse them of being unjust. The room grew quieter. I looked again at the board. 3 victims, 3 lessons, 3 gestures that exceeded necessity. You're saying he's afraid of being criticized, I said. No, Wolfe replied. I am saying he is afraid of being wrong. Renina's eyes narrowed. That sounds similar. It is not, Wolfe said calmly. Criticism is social. Error is internal. He rose. A slow, deliberate ascent, and moved to the board. His shadow fell across the cards. This is not revenge, he said. Rena folded her arms. Then, what is it? Theology, Wolfe replied. The word hung in the air like incense. I frowned. You think he's religious? I think, Wolfe said, he believes in purity. He pointed to the pattern. Revenge is personal. It is directed at a specific injury. Our killer does not avenge himself. He avenges principle. Rena's voice was measured. You're making him sound abstract. He is not abstract, Wolfe said. He is meticulous. And he corrects their ledgers so thoroughly that no counter-argument remains. I said slowly, he's building airtight cases. Yes, for dead men, yes. Rana studied the board. If this is theology, what's the doctrine? Wolfe's eyes glinted faintly. Balance, he said. Purification, restoration. I thought of Evan Cross in the Civic Center. Returning 2 extra bills with ceremonial gravity, accuracy matters. Institutions must be reformed. Cross had said. I said quietly, what happens when institutions move too slowly? Wolfe looked at me. Then, he said, the believer becomes impatient. Werner paced once across the office, controlled but restless. So we're hunting someone who thinks they're saving the city from impurity. She stopped. And they're escalating. Not yet, Wolfe replied. She blinked. 3 murders isn't escalation. Not in scope, Wolfe said. In refinement. He pointed again to the unnecessary fairness. These gestures grow bolder. The ghost payment, the press packet, each risks exposure. Each increases complexity. I nodded slowly. He's adding footnotes. Wolfe's lips twitched faintly. Precisely. Renita said. Which means, Wolfe replied, that he will not be satisfied until the narrative is flawless. And that's when he'll make a mistake? I asked. Wolfe returned to his chair and settled into it like a judge reclaiming the bench. No, he said, that is when he will overreach. Yuna's gaze sharpened. You're certain there will be another? Yes. She looked at the board again, at the names of the harmed beneath each victim. Do you see a pattern in the harmed? She asked. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, reviewing what he had absorbed. Yes, he said at last. I straightened. What? They are articulate, Wolfe said. Rena frowned. Articulate. The borrowers, the workers, the former clients. They are individuals who complained, who filed grievances, who spoke. I considered that. It was true. Lena Klein had confronted Vance. Workers had filed formal complaints against Pike. Former attendees had quietly accused Kerr. He's not hunting silent victims, I said. He listens through intake clinics, reform committees, grievance summaries, and oversight boards. He positioned himself wherever resentment was archived. Rena's expression shifted subtly. Listens where? Wolfe met her gaze evenly. In rooms where grievances are aired, he said. Civic meetings, legal consultations, advocacy groups. The House of Right. Rena inhaled slowly. You think he's embedded in reform? I think, Wolfe replied, he thrives on testimony. I looked at the board, at the arcs and connections and careful ink. If this is theology, I said, what's the sin he can't forgive? Wolfe's eyes were steady. Inconsistency, he said. And what's the unforgivable offense? Rena pressed. To be declared righteous, Wolfe said quietly, and to be shown corrupt. Miles Kerr, Rena's jaw tightened. Wolfe continued, voice calm. Our killer does not merely punish wrongdoing, he punishes hypocrisy. Silence settled like dust. I glanced again at the unnecessary fairness, at the ghost payment, the duplicate evidence. He's scrubbing, I said. Yes, Wolfe replied. And he cannot stop scrubbing until the surface reflects him perfectly. Birna's voice dropped. What happens when someone challenges him? Wolfe's gaze did not waver. He will attempt, he said, to correct them. Chapter 7, the fourth lesson, an alibi of virtue. The fourth body fell like punctuation. By then the city was no longer surprised. It was attentive. Silas Rowe had once been addressed as Your Honor with regularity and respect. He had retired 2 years earlier, under what the newspapers politely termed ethical concerns, a phrase that means money had been present where money should not have been. He was found in his study. Same cut sam, composed body. Same theatrical restraint. On the desk before him lay a single card, squared with the blotter as if measured. Balance restored. I received the call just after dinner. Wolfe had finished a satisfactory duck and was in a contemplative mood, which for him meant less complaint than usual. Rowe, Stebbins said over the line, retired judge, study at home looks familiar. Let me guess, I said. Clean-cut, polite corpse. And paperwork, Stebbins added. A lot of it. Wolfe listened without asking to be updated. When I hung up, he said only, we will go. Rowe's house was a tall, narrow structure on a respectable street that pretended to be quieter than it was. The study smelled of old books and expensive hesitations. Silas Rowe sat in a leather chair behind his desk, hands folded neatly, eyes open in permanent objection. The cut had been delivered with the same clinical precision. No overturned lamps, no shattered glass. Order. On the desk beside the card were 2 thick folders. Rena Hale stood by the bookshelf, pale but controlled. Stebbins hovered near the door, his face set in lines that had grown deeper over the past week. I approached the desk without crossing any boundaries. The first folder was labeled with Rowe's name and contained copies of his old rulings. Specifically, a cluster of cases involving financial settlements and disputed verdicts. Attached to several were highlighted notes, campaign contributions, speaking fees, consulting arrangements. Money spoke louder than law. The second folder was titled in crisp block letters, Appeals Granted. Inside were documents reopening a case from 12 years ago, a man convicted on thin evidence, later exonerated when new testimony surfaced. The man had already been cleared. The state had apologized. Compensation had been paid. Yet here were fresh filings, motions to reopen, letters to review committees, copies sent to oversight boards. Rena's voice was very quiet. The man's been exonerated for years. Yes, Wolfe said. Stebbins scowled. So why reopen it? Wolfe did not answer immediately. He studied the folders the way a surgeon studies an incision. Then he said, because our moral perfectionist cannot abide loose ends. I looked at the paperwork again. This isn't correcting a current injustice, I said. It's revisiting a past one. Precisely, Wolfe replied. Rena's eyes flicked to him. That's not justice, that's performance. Wolfe's lips thinned. Yes. He turned his gaze to Rose's still face. Justice, Wolfe continued, addresses injury. Performance addresses audience. Stebbins shifted his weight. So, what's he doing? He is demonstrating thoroughness, Wolfe said. The judge's rulings are documented, the questionable cases are assembled, and even a man already exonerated receives renewed attention, so that no one can say the killer overlooked anything. Rena folded her arms tightly.
Nero Wolfe,
He's
the
overcompensating.
of
Yes.
wristwatch. A
Wolfe
jeweler
gestured
stores
faintly
fully
at the
a watch
appeals
that
granted
only
folder.
runs when someone touches it.
This is unnecessary,
Open the
he
back,
said.
there was a
The man's
piercing
innocence
wire
is
flag.
established. Reopening the
watch is
file
tied to a
risks
purse.
scrutiny.
Then a jeweler
It
told
invites
the
examination.
jeweler of the story.
I felt it
Hope
settle.
you like it.
He's
Read
showing
next,
off,
and I will drop
I
part
said.
two.
No, Wolfe replied calmly. He is defending himself preemptively. Irina stared at the card again. Balance restored, she read softly. Wolfe nodded. The language has shifted. From debt to wages to truth, I said. And now balance. Wolfe finished. Stebbins rubbed a hand over his face. He's broadening the theme. He is escalating symbolically, Wolfe corrected. Rena moved closer to the desk. This judge presided over financial misconduct cases. Some of those rulings were controversial, but none were overturned officially. Wolfe inclined his head. And so the killer overturns them ceremonially. I glanced at the exoneration file. He's appealing to history. Yes, Wolfe said. He is correcting not only present corruption but past imperfection. Stebbins muttered, that's not justice, that's vanity. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Exactly. Silence filled the study. The room itself felt staged. Lamps aligned, books squared, even a framed photograph straightened with unnatural precision. He tidied again, I said. How do you catch someone whose fingerprints are principles? Wolfe turned to her slowly. By finding, he said, the moment they cannot resist being fair. She frowned. Fair how? Wolfe looked again at the appeals granted folder. This, he said, tapping it lightly, is indulgence. Indulgence. Stebbins scoffed, reopening a wrongful conviction. Yes, Wolfe said calmly, because it is unnecessary to the symbolic message. It does not strengthen the argument, it complicates it. Renina's eyes narrowed. You think he couldn't help himself? Yes, Wolfe's gaze swept the room once more. Each crime includes a flourish beyond need, a forgiven debt already settled, a wage paid to a man not owed, evidence duplicated for the press, and now an appeal reopened for a man already cleared. I felt a slow, uncomfortable admiration. He's polishing. He is scrubbing history, Wolfe corrected. Stebbins said. So he'll keep going. Yes. Who's next? Stebbins demanded. Wolfe's expression did not change. Summonon, he said, whose virtue has been publicly assumed and privately compromised. Rinna's breath caught faintly. You mean, yes, Wolfe said softly. We all thought of the same word, reformer. The study's grandfather clock ticked, each second an accusation. I looked at the judge's body again. This one's riskier, I said. Yes, Wolfe agreed. The targets are ascending. From lender, I counted, to contractor, to speaker, to judge, each step higher in public trust. Rinna's face tightened. Authority. Yes, Wolfe said. He's not attacking criminals anymore, she whispered. No, Wolfe said quietly. He is attacking legitimacy. The word sat heavy. Stebbins shifted uneasily. That means public fallout. It means, Wolfe replied, he is confident. Rinna straightened. Confident in what? In his righteousness, Wolfe said. He turned toward the doorway. Come, Archie. Outside, the air was cold and dry, the rain having finally exhausted itself. Streetlights cast pale halos on wet pavement. I walked beside Wolfe in silence for half a block before speaking. You've got something, I said. Yes, you know who he is. I know, Wolfe replied, what he cannot resist. And that is correction, Wolfe said. I waited. He will soon encounter a case, Wolfe continued, where the ledger is ambiguous. And D will be unable to leave it ambiguous. I felt the shape of it then, like the outline of a key in a pocket. You're going to give him one, I said. Wolfe did not answer immediately. Then, quietly, yes. Chapter 8. The bait, a crime that doesn't need fixing. Wolfe does not often lie. He prefers omission, silence, or a question placed so precisely that the truth falls out of someone else. But on Tuesday morning, he instructed me to lie publicly. Not a lie, he corrected, adjusting the crease of his vest, a proposition. Rinna Hale stood near the window, arms folded. She had listened in silence while Wolfe explained his intention, and her expression suggested she approved of neither the method nor the necessity. You want to invent a crime, she said evenly. I want, Wolfe replied, to construct an imbalance. He was seated behind his desk, immovable as doctrine. Our adversary cannot tolerate asymmetry, he continued. He corrects ledgers compulsively. If presented with a flawed moral equation, he will feel compelled to balance it. Renina's jaw tightened. You're assuming he's watching? He is, Wolfe said calmly. How can you be sure? Wolfe's eyes flicked toward the stack of newspapers on his desk. Because each lesson has escalated in public scope, our moral perfectionist is not killing in obscurity, he is cultivating awareness. I leaned against the bookshelf. You want to give him something to cultivate? Yes. And what if he resists? Rinna asked. Wolfe regarded her. A perfectionist, he said, can resist a trap. He paused. But he cannot resist an unbalanced moral equation. The plan, when stripped of its elegance, was simple. We would introduce into public discourse the rumor of a local charity director, one Martin Bell, who was allegedly skimming donations. The police, according to whispered frustration, couldn't prove it. Donors were angry, families dependent on the charity were embarrassed, and crucially, the rumor would include a detail that mattered more than theft. The director had supposedly stolen from both wealthy donors and poor families, but only the poor were being publicly blamed for mismanagement. Wolfe dictated the outline while I took notes. The wealthy donors, he said, will be described as disappointed but dignified. The families will be described as suspect. Renina's eyes narrowed. You're manufacturing injustice. I am manufacturing perception, Wolfe corrected. And if someone innocent gets hurt by the rumor, she pressed. The charity does not exist, Wolfe said evenly. The director does not exist. The outrage will be real, the injury will be theoretical. She hesitated. Wolfe continued, voice measured. Our killer does not respond to law, he responds to narrative. By noon the story was circulating, not in headlines, that would have been crude, but in the smaller channels where indignation ferments. A columnist known for moral commentary received an anonymous tip. A community board listserv buzzed with questions. A local radio host hinted darkly at mismanagement in charitable circles. By evening, the rumor had weight. At the brownstone, Wolfe sat in his chair like a spider who has arranged his web without fuss. Rena paced once across the office. And now we wait. Yes? For what? She demanded. For correction, Wolfe said. I watched the news feeds refresh on my phone. Comments multiplied. Donors expressed outrage. Callers to radio programs demanded investigation. A few voices defended the imaginary director, arguing that accusations without proof were dangerous. Wolfe listened to a late-night broadcast with his eyes closed. He will focus, Wolfe murmured, on the asymmetry. What asymmetry? I asked. The poor blamed, Wolfe replied, the wealthy inconvenienced. Renata stopped pacing.
Nero
You're
Wolfe and the
certain
umbilical
that detail
cord
will
of
matter.
wristwatch. A jeweler
Yes.
shows fulfill
Why?
watch that
Because
only
it
lasts
introduces
10
unfairness
seconds.
without violence.
Open the bag,
She
there,
studied him,
here thin
and he
wire
can't
thread.
tolerate that.
The watch is tied to
Number the
belt.
first 24
Archie
hours
Goodwin,
passed without
let's
blood.
figure it out
The city
story.
argued. The rumor
Like
grew
this.
legs. A small
Next,
protest even
and I
formed
drop
outside the
out
fictional charity's supposed address. An empty storefront on Lexington. Wolfe remained patient. On the second evening, something shifted. A blog post appeared. Anonymous, articulate, precise. It dissected the rumor line by line. The author did not defend Martin Bell. The author corrected the framing. While allegations of misappropriation warrant investigation, the post read, it is morally indefensible to shift suspicion onto beneficiary families without evidence. Accountability must be evenly distributed. Evenly distributed. I read it aloud. Rena's eyes sharpened. That's him, possibly, Wolfe said calmly. The post continued. If funds were diverted, then both donor oversight and administrative conduct must be examined. To scapegoat the vulnerable while shielding the affluent is to perpetuate injustice. Wolfe's lips curved faintly. He cannot resist correcting the record, he said. But he hasn't killed anyone, Rena said. Not yet, Wolfe replied. The blog post gained traction. It was shared in civic groups, quoted in a column, praised for its measured tone. By the third day, a second post appeared. This one was more pointed. If authorities lack sufficient evidence to prosecute, they must not allow rumor to tarnish the innocent. Justice delayed is not justice denied, but injustice perpetuated is. I lowered the phone slowly. Rena folded her arms. He's not biting the hook. He has already bitten, Wolfe replied. How? She demanded. He has engaged, Wolfe said. He has invested. Rena frowned. Engaging isn't murder. No, Wolfe agreed, but it reveals priority. He leaned forward slightly. Our killer's theology requires correction of imbalance. I have provided imbalance without blood. He has responded with words. And I asked, and he will seek closure. Wolfe said softly. That evening, another development. An envelope arrived at the brownstone, no return address. Clean white paper inside, a single sheet typed in block letters. False accusations corrupt the ledger, no signature. Rena stared at it. Wolfe examined the paper without touching it directly. No, he said. He is admonishing me. I felt a chill. He knows, I said. Yes. Rena's voice dropped. He's watching you. Yes. Wolfe's expression did not change. He is offended, Wolfe continued, that the equation is fictional. I blinked, offended. Yes, the imbalance is contrived. It lacks authentic grievance. Rena's eyes widened slightly. You think he knows the director isn't real? Not yet, Wolfe said, but he senses the artificiality. I considered the blog posts, the precise language, the insistence on fairness, the calm rebuke. He wants a real injustice, I said. Yes. Wolfe tapped the letter once. A moral perfectionist, he said, cannot tolerate ambiguity, but neither can he tolerate falsity. Rena exhaled slowly. So what now? Wolfe's eyes were steady. Now, he said, we make the imbalance personal. I stared at him. How? Wolfe's gaze shifted to the caseboard, where Evan Cross's name had been added quietly in the corner days ago. Our killer, Wolfe said softly, will not allow a record to remain uneven. Renida followed his gaze. You think it's Cross, she said. I think, Wolfe replied, that he is too invested in the narrative. And if you're wrong, Wolfe's eyes returned to the anonymous letter. Then someone, he said, is very anxious that I remain incorrect. The room felt charged like the moment before a verdict. Outside, the city buzzed with invented outrage. Inside, Wolfe waited for the correction he was certain would come. And somewhere, in a room as tidy as a conscience, a man who could not stand an uneven ledger was deciding whether fiction deserved punishment. Chapter 9. The Tell. The fairness that gives them away. Rain returned on Thursday as if it had a subscription. Not a storm, just a steady, deliberate drizzle that made alleys reflective and conscience theatrical. The community center on Riddle Street had closed an hour earlier. Its brick walls held the warmth of civic virtue, and its back door opened into a narrow service alley, lined with dented trash bins and a single wavering security light. At 9:30 precisely, a man who did not exist arrived. Martin Bell, the fictional charity director, was portrayed that evening by a young investigator from the district attorney's office who possessed an unremarkable face and nerves of reliable steel. He wore a damp overcoat and carried a briefcase containing nothing of consequence. Renner Hale stood with me beneath a shallow overhang across the alley. Collar turned up against the rain. Stebbins and two plainclothes officers were positioned farther down, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. And Nero Wolfe, who despises damp air and uneven pavement, stood in the deepest shadow beside a stack of wooden pallets, his bulk concealed by darkness and conviction. You mind me, I murmured to Rena, why we couldn't do this somewhere dry? Because, she said quietly, perfectionists prefer symmetry. The rumor had evolved exactly as Wolfe predicted. The blog posts had grown sharper. The anonymous letter had warned against false accusation. The moral argument had intensified, not toward violence, but toward resolution. The imbalance lingered. And imbalance, to our moral perfectionist, was intolerable. At 9:32, Bell stopped short. An envelope was taped squarely to the back door of the community center. White, clean, precisely centered at eye level. Across its face, typed in block letters, confession. Bell hesitated, just enough to sell authenticity, then reached for it. Don't open it yet, Rena whispered under her breath. Though Bell could not hear her, Bell removed the envelope carefully and stepped back under the security light. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, structured, meticulous. It was a confession from Martin Bell admitting to skimming funds, manipulating records, and diverting donations. It detailed amounts, dates, methods. It was signed and dated and notarized. Too neat, too perfect. I felt the trap close in my chest before it closed in the alley. No killer, Rena murmured, would notarize a fake confession. Not unless, I said softly, they couldn't stand leaving doubt. Wolfe did not move. Bell held the document at arm's length, reading silently, performing astonishment. Rain tapped against metal and brick. The alley smelled faintly of wet paper and old coffee grounds. Then, a figure entered from the far end. Hood up, hands in pockets, steps calm, not hurried, not hesitant, measured. The figure paused 10 feet from the door, observing. Bell pretended not to notice. The figure approached the door slowly, gaze fixed not on Bell, but on the space where the envelope had been. Empty now, a small pause. Then the figure looked at the tape left behind, one edge slightly curled by the rain. He reached out and adjusted it, not because it mattered, not because anyone was watching, but because it was crooked. He pressed the tape flat against the brick, smoothing it with his thumb, aligning it precisely with the mortar line. That small act, straightening what did not need straightening, was not caution. It was devotion. Wolfe stepped out of the shadow. His voice, when it came, was neither loud nor hurried. Evan Cross, he said. You're always fixing what doesn't need fixing. The hooded figure froze, not dramatically, just a stillness, like a held breath. Then he lowered the hood. Rain beaded on his hair but did not disturb his composure. Evan Cross regarded Wolfe without surprise. I wondered, Cross said mildly, when you would attempt something theatrical. Stebbins and the officers moved in from behind, careful, controlled. Cross did not run. Of course he didn't. He glanced once at the confession in Bell's hand. That document, Cross said calmly, is fraudulent. Yes, Wolfe replied, as is the charity. Cross's gaze returned to Wolfe. So you admit to fabrication. I admit to imbalance, Wolfe said. Cross's mouth curved faintly. You've been manufacturing injustice, he said. Yes. And you expected me to correct it. Yes. Cross looked around the alley. At the officers, at Rena, at the rain. You think adjusting a piece of tape convicts me? No, Wolfe said. Your need to notarize a false confession does. A flicker, barely perceptible, crossed Cross's eyes. The confession was not false, he said. Bell raised the document slightly. It's signed by me. Yes, Wolfe said, and notarized by a licensed notary whose seal you forged. Cross did not react outwardly. Wolfe continued, voice steady. You could have left a note. You could have allowed rumor to fester. Instead, you created certainty. Cross's tone remained composed. Certainty prevents harm. No, Wolfe said quietly. Certainty prevents dissent. Rain intensified slightly, drumming against the metal bins. Rena stepped forward. You reopened Roe's old case, she said, for a man already exonerated. He deserved clarity, Cross replied. He already had it, she snapped. Not fully, Cross said. Public memory is imperfect. Wolfe nodded once. Yes, he said. You cannot tolerate imperfection. Cross's eyes settled on him. And you can, he asked. I can tolerate ambiguity, Wolfe replied. You cannot. Stebbins moved closer. You left a ghost payment to Leo Maris, he said. Why? Cross's gaze did not waver. Because Pike overpaid him to conceal misconduct. The ledger was contaminated. You risked exposure, Stebbins pressed. Accuracy matters, Cross said quietly. The words hung there. I felt the pieces click. 2 extra bills, I said. Cross glanced at me. The coffee clerk, I continued. You corrected her change like it was sacred. Cross's expression did not change. It was incorrect, he said. Wolfe stepped closer. You are not avenging yourself, Wolfe said. You are cleansing narrative. Cross's eyes sharpened slightly. They were corrupt, he said. Yes, Wolfe agreed. And you required unanimity. They exploited the vulnerable. Yes, they profited from asymmetry. Yes, and institutions failed to correct them. Wolfe inclined his head. And so you performed correction, he said. Cross's voice remained calm, almost gentle. I restored balance. You restored performance. Wolfe replied. A pause. Cross's gaze drifted briefly toward the confession again. You introduced a lie, he said to Wolfe. You polluted the ledger. And you could not leave it polluted, Wolfe said. Silence stretched. Stebbins stepped forward. Evan Cross, he said. You're under arrest for the murders of Caleb Vance, Gordon Pike, Miles Kerr, and Silas Rowe. Cross did not resist. As the cuffs closed around his wrists, he looked at Wolfe. You staged injustice, he said quietly, to catch me. Yes. And you feel justified. Yes, Wolfe said calmly. A faint, almost amused breath escaped Cross. Then we are not so different, he said. Wolfe's gaze was steady. We are entirely different, he replied. I do not require the world to agree with me. Cross tilted his head slightly. Every own requires agreement, he said. No, Wolfe said. Only those who cannot tolerate doubt. The rain softened again. Cross was led down the alley, posture straight, steps even. As he passed the door, His eyes flicked once more to the strip of tape he had straightened. Perfectly level, the alley felt smaller after he left. Rena exhaled slowly. "That was the tell," she said. "Yes," Wolfe replied. "The fairness that gives them away." Wolfe adjusted his hat. "No," he said quietly. "The fairness they cannot resist giving away." Chapter 10. Wolfe breaks the sermon. Evan Cross did not request a lawyer, he requested conversation. That, more than anything, confirmed Wolfe's judgment. "We gathered in the community center's small conference room. Metal table, fluorescent light, rain tracing faint lines down the narrow window. Cross sat straight, backed in a folding chair, cuffs secured, but posture immaculate. Rena Hale stood near the wall, arms folded with professional restraint. Stebbins remained by the door, looking as though he would have preferred a simpler villain. Wolfe took the only substantial chair in the room and made it look like a throne. Cross regarded him with steady calm. "You call it murder," Cross said, voice smooth as polished stone. "I call it moral correction." Wolfe did not respond immediately. He placed the notarized confession on the table between them and flattened it with one broad hand. "This," he said, "is your flaw." Cross's gaze dipped briefly to the paper, then returned. "A fabrication," he said mildly. "Yours, yes." Wolfe agreed. "And you could not abide it." Cross's expression did not flicker. "False accusations corrupt the ledger." Wolfe inclined his head. "And so you corrected it thoroughly. You drafted a confession, signed it, dated it, notarized it." "Certainty prevents harm," Cross said. "No," Wolfe replied. "Certainty prevents dissent." The fluorescent light hummed faintly overhead. Rain ticked softly against the glass. Cross leaned forward slightly, chains giving a small metallic sigh. "They deserved it," he said. Wolfe nodded once, like acknowledging weather. "Perhaps," he said. Caleb Vance exploited desperation. Gordon Pike withheld wages. Miles Kerr profited from hypocrisy. Silas Rowe compromised justice. He paused. "But you did not stop at consequences." Cross's eyes sharpened. "You needed applause," Wolfe continued. "You needed unanimity." Yerna shifted slightly, watching Cross's face. Wolfe tapped the confession lightly. "A real killer escapes," he said. "You edit." Cross's jaw tightened a fraction. "You could not leave the world imperfect," Wolfe went on. "Not even your crime." Stebbins snorted softly, but said nothing. Cross's voice remained level. "I ensured fairness." Wolfe's gaze hardened. "No," he said. "You ensured narrative." He gestured faintly with one hand, counting as if reviewing a ledger. "You voided a debt already manageable. You issued a wage payment to a man not owed. You duplicated evidence for the press when the police would have found it. You reopened a case already resolved." Each point landed like a measured tap of a gavel. "You performed unnecessary fairness," Wolfe said. Cross's composure wavered for the first time, not in anger, but in intensity. "Loose ends matter," he said quietly. "Yes," Wolfe agreed. "To you." Silence stretched. Cross looked at Rena. "Institutions fail," he said. Wolfe added calmly. "Dominic Hale's office shared intake summaries with community reform groups. Mr. Hale was negligent in access control, not murderous in temperament." "They do," she replied. "And when they fail," he continued, "people suffer." "Yes." "So I restored balance." Wolfe leaned forward slightly, the motion deliberate. "You restored a version of balance," he said, "one that required no disagreement." Cross's lips pressed thin. "You left no space," Wolfe continued, "for mercy, ambiguity, or error." Cross's eyes flashed. "Error," he said. "There was no error. There is always error," Wolfe replied calmly. "In judgment, in evidence, in interpretation." He held Cross's gaze. "You could not tolerate the thought that someone, somewhere, might say you were unjust." Cross did not answer. Wolfe's voice softened, but it did not warm. That is why you notarized the confession. A faint tremor crossed Cross's hand, quickly stilled. You could have left a note, Wolfe said. You could have allowed rumor to resolve itself. Instead, you created documentation, you sealed doubt. And you forged the seal of a notary who volunteers at your own civic committee. The ink matches the pad in your office. Doubt breeds corruption, Cross said. No, Wolfe replied. Doubt breeds humility. The word hung in the room. Cross's breathing remained steady, but something in his expression shifted, less certain, more defensive. You staged injustice, he said to Wolfe. To trap me? Yes. And you feel justified? Yes. A faint, almost incredulous smile touched Cross's mouth. Then we are not so different. Wolfe's eyes were very steady. We are entirely different, he said. How? Cross asked. I do not require the world to agree with me, Wolfe replied. Silence. Renner stepped forward at a nod from Stebbins. The click of the cuffs being adjusted was small but definitive. As Stebbins moved to escort Cross out, Cross paused at the doorway. You cannot deny, he said quietly, that they were guilty. Wolfe did not rise. Guilt, he said, is not license. Cross held his gaze for a final second, then allowed himself to be led away. The rain had thinned to a mist by the time we stepped back into the alley. Streetlights cast pale halos on damp brick. The strip of tape on the door, perfectly level, caught the light briefly before dissolving into shadow. Rena exhaled slowly. He believed it, she said. Yes, Wolfe replied. He thought he was saving the city. Wolfe adjusted his hat. Being right, he said softly, is a craving. We walked toward the street. And cravings, Wolfe continued, more to the night than to us, make people sloppy, even when they are dressed as virtue. 3 weeks later, in the familiar comfort of the brownstone office, Wolfe concluded the matter formally. Evan Cross had left behind a careful trail of research. Notes on grievances, copies of complaints, lists of names. He had volunteered for 3 years at a legal aid intake clinic that shared space with Dominic Hale's practice, cataloguing debt and wage complaints under the guise of reform analysis. Lena Klein's file had crossed his desk there. He had positioned himself at community meetings, in reform committees, in rooms where frustration fermented into testimony. He had not killed out of rage. Lena Klein had never known him. She had filed a routine complaint through the clinic and forgotten it. Cross selected her because her case was tidy, documented, sympathetic, narratively efficient. The police withdrew suspicion within hours of his arrest. He had killed to complete sentences. When Wolfe finished explaining the chain of reasoning, each unnecessary fairness gesture, each escalation of narrative, each indulgent correction, I poured him a glass of beer. You know, I said, some people are still calling him a hero. Evan Klein had come by that morning. Lena was home, exhausted but unharmed, furious at being turned into a symbol. He tried to thank Wolfe. Wolfe accepted the check and declined the gratitude. Wolfe snorted faintly. Heroes, he said, do not notarize confessions. I grinned. You're disappointed, I said. In what? That he wasn't more interesting. Wolfe settled back into his chair, enormous and composed. He was interesting, he said. He mistook coherence for morality. Now, Wolfe said, the city will return to its usual imbalance. Until the next sermon, I said, Wolfe's eyes half closed. There will always be imbalance, Archie. That is not the problem. What is? He regarded me steadily. The problem, he said, is the man who believes he can correct it without error and cannot endure being told he has. From the kitchen drifted the scent of something rich and deliberate, Fritz preparing dinner with the kind of care that does not require applause. Outside, New York moved in uneven rhythms, sirens, taxis, laughter, argument, imperfect. Aliv Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, satisfied not with righteousness, but with resolution, and for once, the ledger was allowed to remain slightly, humanly unfinished.